So I inadvertently stopped the video, so sorry about that abrupt transition to presentation number 2. However, once you download the text zip file, just locate that text zip file. I'll show mine in the Finder. I'm going to, for the sake of the demonstration, I'll drag it to the desktop. I'll double click on it, which will unzip the archive, and that'll generate a text folder. Now, just a reminder, this text is shorthand for texture, and Cinema 4D recognizes that as part of the search path for existing textures. It's really important that you bundle this folder inside your project folder. So I would drag and drop this text folder into my project folder. So now I've already done that, and it's really important that the texture folder sits in the root of the project folder along with any Cinema 4D project files. That's because it looks inside its own folder for texture reference, and text is an appropriate shorthand that Cinema 4D recognizes as a texture path. So that's not just arbitrary that I have my solar system project folder and my text folder inside that folder. That's an important hierarchical relationship. So once I've established that, I have my project folder, I have my texture folder, and now I can get started with the task of modeling the solar system. Now, as I mentioned before, I have some notes here on my notepad, and I just jotted down a couple of numbers for the 9 planets from this 9planets.org website, and the numbers that I jotted down were the diameter of the planets. Again, not that I'm going to scale these to, not that I'm going to model these things to scale, but just to have a reference, kind of a sense of how the pieces of this puzzle is going to fit together. So I'll be referencing some of those numbers as I go, and I'll also show you a little mock-up here in just a second of scale. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've launched Cinema 4D, haven't done a single thing yet, and as I like to do, I immediately want to do a quick save as, and I'm going to establish the path to my project folder, and I'll call this Solar 01. And maybe I'll update that name a little bit later, but I think that that'll be intuitive enough. So I have Solar 01. I'll save that, and now I've established my project folder, my destination, my project file, and my textures, and now I can start to work on this project. It's really important to have the file saved prior to applying textures, because if we didn't save this file, it would only exist in RAM, right? And this file needs to know where it lives and where it belongs in order to make a relative reference to the texture files. So just a little reminder from last semester, save the project in your project folder, stay organized, and everything will fall into place. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is going to be a really easy modeling project, right? Because it's all based on spheres. There might be a few rings in there and a couple of other things that we throw in there, but essentially we're dealing with a couple of spheres, or a bunch of spheres. Now, the presentation will come down to the textures and kind of the size and scale of these spheres and the reference of it. But just to get started, I'm going to create a sphere, and so I have a point of reference. I'll call this Sun. Not a bad idea to mock up some temporary textures as well. We can change them later. Now, if I were to, I'm going to create another sphere, okay? And if I were to model these, the Sun and the Earth, if I were to model those to scale, just in terms of their diameter, I'm going to go to this sphere, and I'm going to call it Earth. Let's take a look and see what happens. Now, I'm going to round these numbers way down. I'm going to select the Sun, and according to my notes here, if I were to make this to scale, I'm going to set the radius to 1,390 centimeters. Now, obviously, the Sun's much bigger than 1,000 centimeters, but I'm going to set the Earth scale relative to that. This would be 12. Okay, so that's it. According to my notes, that is the relative size of Sun to Earth. Okay, I'll give that a quick render. That's what it's going to look like. Now, obviously, Mercury is much smaller than the Earth, and So this won't make any sense if we model this thing to scale. So the key here, I'm going to make some assumptions about the sun. I'm actually going to make the sun much smaller. I'm going to make the Earth, I'm going to establish the size of the Earth and model and scale everything relative to that. And then I'll just kind of go off track here and scale things so that from a design standpoint, they make more sense. So I'm quickly going to make a correction here, and I'm going to select the Earth, and I'm going to set my Earth to 120 centimeters. And that kind of gives me a general reference. Now I'm going to go to the sun, and I'm going to kick that down to about 500 to get started and see how I feel about that. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'll probably actually make the sun a little bit bigger later, but again, it all depends on how things work out in terms of the presentation. I want to get a reference point here. Now, for the sake of the demonstration, I created the sun and I did not move the sun along any axis. I created the Earth and I moved the Earth according to the x-axis. What I'm going to do is every planet that I make, I'm just going to move those out according to the x-axis. I'm not going to move them out in z. I want everything in a direct line. I'm not going to move them along the y-axis. And so that I know that when I select this content, when I select my planets, the only value that's going to change in terms of their position is the x value. Okay, and that'll be a handy reference a little bit later. So so I have my sun established. I have my Earth. I'm going to move the Earth out just a little bit. I'm going to create an additional sphere, and this sphere is going to be Mercury. So I'll create Mercury. I'll move that out a little bit. Mercury is going to be much smaller, and according to my notes here, I'm going to key that down to about 40 centimeters. Okay. Rather than creating a new sphere and dragging it over, I'm going to copy and paste Mercury. And so in my object manager, I have Mercury number 1, and I'll rename that. What's the second planet? Is it Mars or Venus? Well, it's Venus. It's not Vernus. Let me fix that. It's Venus. Now Venus is roughly the same size as Earth. It's a little bit smaller. According to my notes, I have just the same size as Earth. So I'll set it to the exact same size, and maybe I'll just kick it down just a little bit. Again, I'm not worried about accuracy of scale here at this point, but I do want to just kind of establish a couple of things. Now, I have 3 planets generated, and that gives me kind of, a sense to get started with the solar system. I'll start to add some of the other planets, including Mars, here in just a minute, but I want to reshuffle my object manager hierarchy. I want this to kind of read in linear fashion from the sun on out. So I want the sun first, then I want Mercury, then Venus, and then Earth. So now I know if I click through these, they move further out from the sun as we go. And we'll continue to make some modifications to this here in just a bit. I'm going to Command C and Command V planet Earth, so I get an Earth copy, and I'll move that down, and I'll rename this Mars, and then I need to move that out. Now Mars is going to be smaller than Earth. It's about half the size of Earth. I'm also going to select Earth, and I'll copy and paste Earth, and I'll move that out a little bit. I do want a moon as well. Now the moon is 1/4 the size of Earth. So I could do the math in my head of 120 divided by 4, or I could just, in this field, remember we can actually do math functions within this field, I'll divide by 4 and hit enter, and Cinema 4D will do the math for me. So I now have the moon, and I'll kind of move that down so it's nested close to the Earth, and I'll start to group those things together. Now, I do want to make some additional adjustments here to the hierarchy and kind of the rigging of my solar system before I start to texture and animate this thing, but we'll do that in the next presentation.